Hi everyone, I'm Ray Monday, Team Associated Factory Driver here in Australia, and on this edition of Hearns Racing I'd like to introduce you to the brand new Team Associated four-wheel drive off-road electric buggy, the B74. This will be hitting stores really soon. I was very lucky to get mine a couple of weeks ago, and that gave me enough time to build it up and debut it at the Victorian Titles in Mildura last weekend. And I'd like to give you tonight a little bit of a rundown of some of the new features of the car, and I'll let you know how it felt on the track. Okay, let's take a look under the skin of the B74. In terms of layout, it's similar to the B64. You've got the battery in the back right, the motor on the left hand side, the servo on the front right, and the speed control front left. You're driving a shaft drive centre, so kind of similar concept. Where you start to notice the difference, the chassis backbone on the B64 there was like a vertical brace. With the B74 it's got a plastic backbone that runs all the way along the length of the chassis, and it's got a carbon top plate on top of that there, and that keys in the chassis front and rear to the centre gearbox housing. That gives a lot of stiffness fore and aft, which is good for jump landing, but still allows some twisting stiffness, which is good for keeping traction over the bumps. In the centre of the car, you'll notice I've got a centre differential installed. That's an option part. The car comes standard with a direct drive, like a slipper clutch with a direct connection front to rear. On our dirt tracks, I've always preferred the car with the centre diff. That's an option that I'd recommend most Australian racers to get straight away. It makes the car smoother to drive on dirt, goes through the rough sections a bit better. When you're driving on the really high traction surfaces like carpet and AstroTurf, then the slipper clutch in the centre is better, but for most of our Australian tracks I'd be recommending the centre diff. You'll notice I've outfitted my car with the full Reedy complement of electronics. I'm running a 5.5 turn motor geared at 1878. I've got the 510R speed control with a fan because of the heat we generate in four-wheel drive. One of the new Reedy brushless servos, and the Reedy SG2 Zapper batteries, which are fantastic power. So no shortage of power in this car. Moving towards the front, in terms of the steering, you'll notice that there's an alloy steering block. This was an option on the B64, and we did spend a lot of time on the 64 playing with steering geometry and improving Ackerman. This car comes with all the learnings that we did from the 64 straight away, and it comes with the aluminium rack straight out of the box, which is great for stiffness and for strength. Also, one of the big changes you'll see with the B74 compared to the 64 is the ability to adjust the height of the differentials. So you'll see that there's some aluminium bulkheads. These connect directly to the chassis, and the tower connects to that, and then the gearbox actually bolts into that bulkhead. Now what that gives the advantage of is that we can actually shift the diffs up and down. When you're changing ride height, especially for a very high traction surface, it's better to have the diffs sitting a bit higher with a very low ride height. When we're racing on dirt, we run them a bit lower. Adjusting the height's as simple as undoing, there's two screws that slot up and down, and then there's a third screw here, and you can see it's got a plastic insert. By changing that insert, that adjusts the height of the diff up and down. So it's literally at one end of the car, you loosen off 4 screws and you undo 2, change the insert, do it back up. Very quick change. While we're at the front of the car, one of the changes has been to a longer shock absorber, so they've actually gone to a longer body front and rear. We found with the 64 that the car liked to have more travel. The four-wheel drives, they can run low, but you run a lot of down travel, and then that way when they come off jumps, the tyres touch the ground early, it rides through the bumps better. So these are actually a 24mm body and shaft front and rear. The 64 had a 23mm body and shaft. Car comes standard with sway bars. You can see the front sway bar mounted in here. It actually comes with 4 sway bars, 2 soft and 2 stiff, so you can tune in for high traction or low traction surfaces, so that's nice. The suspension geometry, as with the 64 and most modern cars, is adjustable via pills which sit inside these aluminium carriers. So you've got there's 4 carriers at the front and rear of each of the front and rear suspension arms. That allows you to adjust things like anti-squat, track width, roll center height and toe. I've got a front wing scoop mounted onto the car. It screws into the front of the differential cap. If you want to change get the diff out and change it, there's 2 screws on the side, 2 screws from the front and 1 underneath. 5 screws and you've got the diff out very, very quickly. The diffs themselves are a similar design to the 64, but the team spent a lot of time on trying to optimize the profile of the teeth to get them running very, very freely. And in conjunction with, you'll notice there are now CVAs rather than pure dog bones connecting to the front and rear diffs. The drivetrain is super smooth. There's new bearings that have got less resistance, the new teeth profile. So people like this, I've got the pinion disconnected. If I just give it a little bit of a spin, it rolls very, very freely, and it's super quiet out on the track. So I think for the spec racers, you're really going to feel that difference. It's a lot quieter and smoother than the 64. The rear is similar to the front in that it's got an aluminium pair of aluminium bulkheads, adjustable diff height. You'll notice there's these screws that mount to the center brace. You can take those in or out to adjust the amount of flex. So it's an adjustment we didn't have with the 64. I'm looking forward to trying that on some especially bumpy and low traction tracks. Rear shocks are mounted in front of the arm. Again, a slightly longer shaft now available. So the 64 came with a 27.5mm shock. We found during development it was much better with the 31mm body. It rode the bumps better, and this now includes the 31mm body in the kit, and also now a new 29mm shaft. So again, longer shocks at the rear. Taking a look at the rear of the car, one of the things that we found that worked really well with the B64 was a raised roll center of the rear block, and these blocks are following that geometry now as well. Taking a quick look with the wheels off. The front suspension, similar concept to the B64, with an aluminium upright, and then the hub is a plastic pivoting part with adjustable hats that sit under here, so you can adjust the height of the axle for different traction surfaces. The 74 actually comes with all the adjustment parts in the kit, and the front bearings have been beefed up in size, so that's a good durability improvement. At the rear, the hub design's been changed slightly. So previous design had to adjust the length of the link, which is a critical adjustment as we go from different tracks. You had different holes in here. This one now has an aluminium link, and you'll see there's two screws here and here, and we can put different thickness washers behind there, so you can shunt this part in and out, and then by changing the number of washers under here, we can also change the height of the roll center. One thing I forgot to mention before, the build of the car. The build was fantastic. All the parts fitted perfectly. The sequence is very easy to follow. It was a real joy to put together. I really enjoyed this car. Couple of tips. Firstly, if you haven't built a car with kind of these aluminium bulkheads before, make sure you use plenty of Loctite within the thread. Not too much on the bottom screws. You don't want the bottom screw getting Loctite to the chassis, but make sure you've got plenty of Loctite so you can Loctite in the aluminium. But don't tighten everything up till you've got it all on the chassis. So when you build the car, actually you put the aluminium bulkheads onto the diff housing, then you put the tower on, then you put it on the car. It's better to do all that, get everything kind of lightly screwed up, and then once it's all together and lined up perfectly, then go around in sequence and tighten it up so you don't get any kind of twist in the chassis. You want everything to be sitting nice and true. Okay, so you've seen the new features of the car, how to go on the track. First thing you notice when you go down the straight, how quiet it is. The new transmission design that they've put in is super efficient, super quiet, and I think the spec racers especially will really like that. Even with an open class motor, you can feel the difference in speed. The motor ran cooler. Yeah, really, really nice from that point of view. Secondly, jumping. This car, the new chassis design that gives it a bit more stiffness in bending, and the new long stroke shocks, it lands like nothing else I've ever driven. You could land off a jump. There was one particular jump at Mildura, had to go over a big jump and land into a corner, and it would just suck its way through that and keep driving on. Yeah, so really, really big step up in jumping. And the 64 was a great jumping car, but this is next level. Steering response, super responsive steering. Yeah, it's been designed for basically corner speed. It took a little bit of getting used to be honest. It had so much steering, and getting it dialed into our tracks probably going to take a little bit of time just to smooth it out. But yeah, there'll be no loss of steering. And finally, strength. In practice, when you're running a four-wheel mod car against some of the other classes, you do end up having a few crashes here and there just with the speed difference. And this took a few really big hits on that track, and nothing broken, no issues at all. So I think from a racer's point of view, yeah, you're really going to feel that the drivetrain, the jumping, the steering, and the strength, all positives. And I can't wait to spend a bit more time just dialing in a couple of last little bits and making this thing another awesome weapon on the track. Thanks for your time. See you later.